Everyone in Raymond Wade's territory knew one rule: stay away from Charlie. The Mafia enforcer's 130-pound Rottweiler had hospitalized 3 rival gang members, shredded through steel core leashes like thread, and once dragged a full-grown man across 2 city blocks. No one could get near him without risking their life. Not even Raymond himself felt truly in control. So when a sunny Tuesday afternoon brought a tiny girl in a yellow dress walking home from school, every neighbor watching from their windows held their breath. Charlie's head snapped up. His muscles coiled like loaded springs. The spiked collar around his thick neck gleamed in the afternoon sun. Raymond felt the leather leash burn into his palm as 130 pounds of pure aggression lurched forward. Curtains twitched. A woman gasped from her porch. An elderly man fumbled for his phone to call 911, but the little girl didn't run. She didn't scream. She just stopped, tilted her head, and did something that froze every person on that suburban street. Mary Barrett dropped her beige backpack. She clapped her hands in a rhythm no one recognized. And then she whispered a single word. Charlie stopped growling. His ears twitched forward, and then, in a moment that made Raymond Wade, a man who'd broken bones and collected debts without flinching, actually stepped backward in shock. The beast everyone feared collapsed to the ground and began whining like a puppy. Raymond stared at his empty hands, the leash hanging slack. He'd watched men beg for mercy. He'd seen rivals fall. He'd built his reputation on being the most dangerous man on these streets. But he had never, not once, seen his dog obey anyone, especially not a 7-year-old child. What happened next revealed a truth about Charlie that shattered everything Raymond thought he knew about power, loyalty, and the dog he'd used as a weapon for 2 years. Stay with me until the end, because what this little girl reveals about the Rottweiler will change everything you think you know about what it means to truly own something. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The streets of Northside belonged to Raymond Wade. Not officially, no deed or title bore his name, but everyone who lived there understood the truth. The tattoos crawling up his neck and across his chest told stories that didn't need words. The sharp black blazer he wore over his bare torso sent a message: I don't follow your rules. And the massive Rottweiler that walked beside him every afternoon? That was his exclamation point. Raymond had built his reputation on intimidation and follow-through. Debts got paid, territories got respected. And anyone who thought about challenging him only had to look at Charlie to reconsider their life choices. Charlie had come into Raymond's life 18 months earlier, payment for a debt from an underground breeder who specialized in security animals, a polite term for dogs trained to hurt people. The breeder had sworn Charlie was perfect for Raymond's line of work, aggressive, powerful, and completely loyal to whoever fed him. From day one, Raymond knew something was off. The dog didn't just guard, he hunted. He didn't just bark, he exploded. Walking Charlie wasn't exercise, it was combat. The Rottweiler pulled with such force that Raymond, despite his muscular build and street fighter strength, had to dig his heels into the concrete just to stay upright. The leather leash had permanent grooves where Raymond's grip had worn through the outer layer. Raymond had tried everything. He'd hired a trainer who specialized in aggressive breeds. Charlie sent him running after snapping the training collar clean off his neck. He'd tried using a chain leash. Charlie had lunged so hard the links had left bruises on Raymond's ribs. He'd even consulted with another enforcer who swore by shock collars, but Charlie seemed to get angrier when corrected. The dog had attacked a mailbox so viciously he'd bent the metal pole. He'd torn through a wooden fence when a neighbor's cat walked by. Once, during a collection visit, Charlie had bitten clean through the front tire of a parked car when Raymond wasn't paying attention. But the worst incidents were the ones involving people. 3 members of a rival crew had learned the hard way that challenging Raymond Wade meant facing Charlie. 2 ended up in the emergency room with stitches running from wrist to shoulder. The 3rd had gotten off light, only 7 stitches and a permanent fear of dogs. Word spread fast in the underground. Raymond Wade walked the streets with a loaded weapon. And unlike a gun, this weapon didn't need bullets. It just needed to see movement. Even Raymond kept a wary distance. He fed Charlie with the bowl pushed across the floor. He never reached down to adjust the collar. He certainly never petted the animal. This wasn't a pet. This was a business asset that happened to breathe. But deep down, in a place Raymond rarely acknowledged, he knew the truth. Charlie didn't respect him. Charlie tolerated him. And that made Raymond Wade, a man who'd built everything on dominance, feel something he hadn't felt in years: powerless. The Rottweiler had become his greatest strength and his secret weakness, walking beside him every day like a ticking time bomb wearing a spiked collar. Raymond Wade's Tuesday routine never varied. He woke at dawn, ran 5 miles through empty streets while the city still slept, then returned to his apartment to shower and dress in his signature look: dark jeans, polished boots, and that sharp black blazer worn open over his tattooed chest. The ink told his story better than words ever could. A compass rose over his heart, pointing to nothing in particular, geometric patterns crawling up his neck like warnings, and across his ribs, the names of people who'd mattered once, before they didn't anymore. By 9 o'clock, he was on the streets. By 10, people knew to have his money ready. Charlie walked beside him like a loaded weapon with a pulse. The Rottweiler's presence turned routine collection visits into psychological warfare. Raymond didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. He just had to stand there with that leash wrapped around his scarred knuckles while Charlie stared at whoever owed money. The message was simple: pay, or find out what happens when I let go. It worked every time. Shop owners handed over envelopes without argument. Bookies settled their accounts early. Even the tough guys, the ones who'd spent time inside and thought they'd seen everything, suddenly remembered they had the cash after all, when Charlie's lips pulled back to show teeth designed for tearing meat from bone. The system was efficient. Brutal, but efficient. Raymond collected more money in a morning walk than most enforcers managed in a week of actual violence. His reputation had grown so solid that younger crew members asked to shadow him, to learn his technique. Raymond always said no. They didn't understand that his technique wasn't about skill or strategy. It was about fear. And Charlie was the purest form of fear Raymond had ever owned. Except he didn't really own the dog. Not in any way that mattered. Every morning when Raymond clipped that heavy leather leash to Charlie's spiked collar, he felt the truth in the tension of the line. The Rottweiler didn't heel because he respected Raymond's authority. He walked beside him because the leash was thick, and Raymond's grip was strong, and the physics of the situation hadn't shifted in the dog's favor yet. It was cooperation born from stalemate, not loyalty. Raymond had watched enough nature documentaries to recognize the dynamic. He wasn't the pack leader. He was the guy holding the chain on something wild, pretending that made him in control. The frustration gnawed at him during quiet moments. Here he was, a man who'd built his entire existence on dominance and respect, and he couldn't command basic obedience from his own dog. Charlie didn't come when called, didn't sit on command, didn't show even a flicker of affection or recognition beyond the purely transactional relationship of food provider and food receiver. Raymond had intimidated men twice his size, negotiated deals with people who'd killed for less, and walked into situations that would make normal people freeze with terror. But every single day, twice a day, he struggled just to walk a dog without getting dragged face first into a fire hydrant. It was humiliating. And the worst part? Charlie knew it. The afternoon sun painted Maplewood Street in shades of gold and green, turning the manicured lawns into something from a postcard. Kids' bikes lay abandoned on driveways. American flags hung limp in the windless air. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically, sending rainbows through the mist. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved at each other from porches and knew their mail carrier by name. Raymond Wade didn't belong here, and he knew it. But that was exactly the point. His crew had moved operations into Northside 3 months ago, and these suburban streets needed to understand the new reality. You didn't have to live in the projects to be part of someone's territory. Money moved everywhere, and Raymond's job was making sure the right percentage moved in the right direction. So he walked. Every Tuesday and Thursday, same route, same time. Charlie pulled hard on the leash, his massive shoulders rolling with each aggressive stride. The spiked collar caught the sunlight like a threat made visible. The effect was immediate and visceral. A woman loading groceries into her minivan saw them coming, quickly retreated into her garage, stabbing at the door button repeatedly. An elderly man watering his roses turned off the hose midstream and backed toward his front door without taking his eyes off the Rottweiler. Two teenagers on skateboards took one look at the pair and decided the other end of the street suddenly seemed more appealing. Raymond felt the familiar burn starting in his shoulder. Charlie never just walked. He attacked the concept of forward motion, throwing his entire 130 pounds into every step like he was trying to drag Raymond toward some invisible prey only he could sense. The leather leash creaked under the strain. Raymond's forearm muscles corded tight, veins standing out against his tattooed skin. They passed a young mother pushing a stroller on the opposite sidewalk. She froze, eyes wide, instinctively positioning herself between the stroller and Charlie. The Rottweiler's head swiveled toward them, ears forward, and Raymond felt the sudden surge of tension through the leash like an electric current. He dug his heels into the concrete, leaning back his full weight. His boots scraped against the sidewalk with a sound like sandpaper. "Easy," Raymond growled. But the command was as much for himself as for Charlie. The dog's growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the leash and into Raymond's bones. For 3 endless seconds, man and beast existed in perfect opposition, 130 pounds of muscle pulling forward, 190 pounds of muscle pulling back. Raymond's shoulder joint screamed. The leather bit into his palm, and he could feel the old calluses tearing open underneath. Then the moment passed. The mother speed walked away, and Charlie's attention shifted to a squirrel darting up an oak tree. Raymond exhaled hard, tasting copper. He'd bitten his cheek without realizing it. Sweat ran down his temples despite the mild weather. His blazer felt like it weighed 50 pounds. They were only halfway through the route, and already his entire right side ached like he'd gone 3 rounds with someone who actually knew how to fight back. This was victory, Raymond reminded himself. This was control. This was power. So why did it feel like he was barely surviving? She appeared at the corner of Maplewood and Birch like a splash of sunshine against the monotone suburban backdrop. Yellow dress, bright as a dandelion, swaying with each skipping step. A beige backpack bounced against her small shoulders, covered in colorful patches. A rainbow, a cartoon dinosaur, a glittery star that caught the light. Her blonde hair was pulled into a slightly lopsided ponytail, the kind that suggested she'd done it herself that morning without checking a mirror. Mary Barrett was 7 years old and completely lost in her own world. She hummed as she walked, some tune from a cartoon Raymond didn't recognize. Her pink sneakers had light-up soles that flashed with every step, and she seemed fascinated by them, occasionally pausing to stomp harder just to make them blink brighter. In her right hand, she clutched a piece of paper, probably something she'd made in art class, the edges already crumpled from being gripped too tightly with too much pride. She wasn't looking where she was going. She was doing that thing kids do, existing entirely in the moment, aware of nothing beyond her own small universe of humming and flashing shoes and whatever drawing she'd created. The dangers of the adult world, the predators, the violence, the Raymond Wades with their dangerous dogs, didn't exist in her reality yet. She was maybe 40 feet away when Raymond first noticed her. Just another kid walking home from school, taking the long way, probably avoiding homework for as many minutes as possible. He didn't think much of it. Kids lived in this neighborhood. He'd seen dozens of them over the past months. They always gave him and Charlie a wide berth, warned by parents who understood that some things were best observed from a distance. This girl would be no different. She'd look up, see them, and cross to the other side of the street. Easy, simple, no problem. But then Charlie went rigid. The change was instantaneous and absolute. One moment the Rottweiler was pulling forward in his usual aggressive shamble, and the next he'd locked every muscle in his body like someone had hit a pause button on his nervous system. His head lifted, his nostrils flared. His entire frame quivered with an intensity Raymond had never felt before, not during fights, not during collections, not even during that incident with the rival crew member who'd made the mistake of running. This was different. This was focused. The leash went taut in Raymond's hand, but Charlie wasn't pulling anymore. He was hunting. His eyes fixed on the girl in yellow with laser precision. His lips began to curl back from his teeth, slow and deliberate, revealing gums that looked black against the white of his fangs. The growl that emerged from Charlie's throat wasn't the warning Raymond had heard 100 times before. This was deeper, primal, the kind of sound that bypassed the thinking brain and went straight to the part of human evolution that remembered what it felt like to be prey. Mary kept humming, oblivious, still 20 feet away and closing. Raymond's blood turned to ice water. Charlie exploded forward with a force Raymond had never experienced, not even close. Every other lunge, every other surge of aggression, they'd been warm-ups. This was the real thing. 130 pounds of pure predatory drive launched like a missile, and Raymond's entire body snapped forward like he'd been hit by a car. His boots lost traction on the concrete. His weight shifted wrong. For one terrible heartbeat, Raymond Wade, a man who'd stood his ground against armed opponents, felt himself being dragged forward like a child holding a kite in a hurricane. The leather leash became a band of fire across his palm. The friction generated instant heat, and Raymond felt skin tear, felt the warm slickness of blood making his grip uncertain. His shoulder joint screamed as it hyperextended, his bicep cramped. The veins in his forearm stood out like steel cables about to snap. He dug in harder, bending his knees, dropping his center of gravity, using every technique he'd learned in 2 decades of street fighting. His boots scraped against the sidewalk, leaving black marks. His blazer pulled tight across his shoulders. The muscles in his back went rigid with effort. But Charlie didn't slow down. If anything, the resistance made him more frenzied. Foam flew from his jaws. His claws scraped concrete with sounds like knives on a whetstone. That deep, guttural snarl had escalated into something that barely sounded canine anymore. It was pure violence given voice. Mary was 15 feet away, still humming, still oblivious. "Kid!" Raymond's shout tore out of his throat, raw and desperate. "Get back! Run!" His voice cracked on the last word as Charlie surged again. Raymond's right boot slipped. His knee buckled. For one horrifying second, he felt himself tipping forward, felt the equilibrium shift, felt control sliding through his bloody fingers, along with the leash. Around them, the peaceful afternoon detonated into chaos. A woman's scream cut through the air from an open window across the street. "Oh my God! Someone call 911!" Mr. Henderson, the retired veteran who lived in the Blue Colonial, burst onto his porch with his phone already at his ear, shouting at the dispatcher in a voice trained by military service. "We need police! Now! Dog attack in progress!" Mrs. Chen abandoned her groceries on her driveway and started running toward them, then stopped, realized there was nothing she could do, started running again, froze again, caught in the terrible paralysis of watching disaster unfold. 2 teenage boys on a nearby lawn stood with their mouths open, phones out, recording. One of them was crying. A car swerved, the driver having spotted the scene too late. Brakes shrieked, rubber burned. And through it all, Mary Barrett took 3 more skipping steps, the lights in her pink shoes flashing cheerfully, that same tune humming from her lips. 10 feet now, maybe less. Raymond felt the leash burn deeper into his palm, felt another inch of leather slide through his grip, felt Charlie's muscles bunching for one final catastrophic lunge. He was going to lose control, right now, right here, and that little girl was going to die. Mary Barrett stopped walking, not because of Raymond's screaming, not because of the neighbors shouting warnings from their windows, not even because of the sound of Charlie's snarling, which had reached a pitch that made car alarms seem peaceful by comparison. She stopped because she finally looked up from her light-up shoes and saw what was in front of her. The humming died on her lips. Her grip loosened on the crumpled drawing, and it fluttered to the sidewalk, forgotten. Her entire body went still in that particular way children have, the kind of stillness that comes before either flight or fascination. Raymond expected her to scream. Every fiber of his being braced for it. The high-pitched shriek of a terrified child that would send Charlie into an even deeper frenzy. He'd seen it before. Fear triggered the dog like nothing else. It was gasoline on fire. But Mary didn't scream. She just stood there. 8 feet away from 130 pounds of snarling death, and stared at Charlie with an expression Raymond couldn't read. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were fixed on the Rottweiler's face with an intensity that seemed bizarre given the circumstances. "Get back, kid!" Raymond's voice cracked with desperation, blood from his palm dripping onto the concrete. "He'll kill you! Move!" Charlie lunged again, and this time Raymond's boots actually left the ground for a half-second before he managed to regain footing. His shoulder joint made a sound like tearing fabric. The leash was slick with blood now, sliding another precious centimeter through his grip. 6 feet, maybe 5. "Please!" Raymond shouted, and he heard the unfamiliar sound of begging in his own voice. "Run!" But Mary wasn't running. She wasn't backing away. She wasn't doing anything a rational person would do when facing a dog that clearly wanted to tear her apart. Instead, her eyes went wide. Not with fear. Raymond knew what fear looked like. He'd built his entire career on recognizing it. But with something else entirely. Shock. But not the shock of terror. This was the shock of recognition. The shock of seeing something impossible. The shock of a puzzle piece suddenly, inexplicably, clicking into place. Her mouth formed a small O of surprise. Her eyebrows lifted. And then her expression shifted into something Raymond couldn't process, not in this moment of crisis, not with Charlie literally dragging him forward inch by bloody inch. She looked confused, heartbroken, and underneath it all, angry in that specific way kids get angry when the world has done something fundamentally unfair to them. She didn't look at Charlie like he was a monster. She looked at him like she knew him. "Buster?" The word came out barely above a whisper, but in the chaos of screaming neighbors and snarling dog and Raymond's labored breathing, it somehow cut through everything else. And Charlie heard it. His ears twitched forward. Mary's backpack hit the concrete with a soft thump that somehow registered in Raymond's consciousness despite the chaos. She didn't take her eyes off the Rottweiler as she let it fall. Didn't flinch as Charlie strained against the leash, his massive jaws snapping at air, saliva flying in strings. Then she did something that made absolutely no sense. She clapped her hands together, not in panic, not randomly. It was deliberate, a specific rhythm that sounded almost musical. 3 quick claps, a pause, 2 more claps, another pause, then one final sharp crack of her small palms meeting. The pattern meant nothing to Raymond, but he felt Charlie's entire body language shift through the leash. "Buster!" Mary's voice rang out clear and strong, no fear in it whatsoever. She said it like a command, like she had every right to expect obedience. "Buster down!" She clapped again, the same strange rhythm. 3 pause, 2 pause, 1. Raymond's mind reeled even as his body continued its desperate struggle to maintain control. Buster? Who the hell was Buster? The dog's name was Charlie. Had been Charlie since the day Raymond got him. The breeder had called him Charlie. The vet records said Charlie. Everyone knew him as Charlie. But the Rottweiler's ears snapped forward like they'd been yanked by invisible strings. The growling, that deep, chest-rumbling sound that had been building toward violence for the past 30 seconds, stopped. Not gradually, not a fade-out. It just stopped. Mid-throat, like someone had flipped a switch in the dog's brain. Charlie's jaws, which had been open and ready to bite, slowly closed. His lips covered his teeth. The foam still dripped from his muzzle, but the predatory tension began draining from his muscles like water from a punctured balloon. "Buster, it's me," Mary said, and her voice cracked on the last word. Tears were streaming down her face now, though her expression was more joy than fear. "It's Mary, remember? Remember our game?" She clapped again. 3, 2, 1, the same pattern. And Charlie, no, apparently Buster, whined. It was a sound Raymond had never heard from the dog in 18 months. High-pitched, plaintive, almost puppyish. The Rottweiler's tail, which had been rigid as a steel bar, began to wag, not the aggressive helicopter wag of excitement before violence. This was hesitant, uncertain, almost hopeful. The tension in the leash went slack so suddenly that Raymond stumbled backward, his bloody hand still gripping leather that was no longer under any strain. His shoulder throbbed, his palm burned. Blood dripped steadily onto his boots. But Charlie wasn't pulling anymore, wasn't lunging, wasn't even looking at Raymond. The dog's entire focus had narrowed to the little girl in the yellow dress, and every line of his body had transformed from predator to something Raymond didn't have words for. Recognition. That's what it was. Pure, absolute recognition. The snarling beast that no one could control, that Raymond had used as a weapon for a year and a half, was staring at a 7-year-old girl like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Charlie moved, and Raymond's body tensed for the attack he'd been dreading. But the dog wasn't lunging with teeth bared. He was pulling with purpose. The same raw power, completely different intent. Raymond stumbled forward, his boots scraping concrete, still trying to hold back out of pure instinct. But there was no aggression in the pull anymore. Charlie was dragging him like a child, dragging a parent toward a toy store window, desperate and single-minded and completely heedless of the obstacle attached to his collar. Mary dropped to her knees on the sidewalk, arms spreading wide. And that's when Raymond realized with absolute certainty that he was about to watch a little girl get mauled. His bloody hand tightened on the leash one final time, preparing to yank back with everything he had left. Then Charlie's massive head buried itself in Mary's chest, and the sound that came out of him was pure, unfiltered joy. Not a growl, not a snarl, a whine that climbed into something almost like crying, punctuated by snuffling and snorting as the Rottweiler's entire body wiggled with excitement. His tail wagged so hard his whole back end swayed. His front paws danced on the concrete. Mary threw her thin arms around the dog's thick neck and sobbed into his fur. "I missed you. I missed you so much. Where have you been? Where did you go?" Charlie, Buster, whatever his name actually was, responded by knocking her flat onto her back with enthusiasm that would have been terrifying if it wasn't so clearly loving. He stood over her, front paws on either side of her small body, and proceeded to lick every inch of her face with a tongue the size of a washcloth. Mary laughed through her tears, a sound of pure happiness that seemed obscene given what Raymond had thought was about to happen 30 seconds ago. She didn't push the dog away. She hugged him tighter, her small fingers digging into his fur while he covered her yellow dress in drool, and his entire muscular body trembled with what could only be described as ecstasy. "Good boy," Mary whispered, kissing the top of his massive head. "Good boy, Buster. I knew you'd remember. I knew you wouldn't forget me." Raymond stood over them both, the leash hanging completely slack in his ruined hand, blood still dripping steadily onto the concrete. His chest heaved with exertion and adrenaline and something else he couldn't name. His shoulders screamed. His muscles quivered with exhaustion. Around them, the neighborhood remained frozen in the tableau of interrupted tragedy. Mrs. Chen stood on her driveway with both hands covering her mouth. Mr. Henderson still had his phone to his ear, but he'd stopped talking. The teenage boys had lowered their phones, no longer recording, just staring. Raymond's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This was Charlie. His Charlie. The untamable weapon. The dog that had hospitalized grown men. The beast that had never shown affection to anyone. That had never obeyed a single command, that Raymond had controlled through force and fear and leather. And he was currently on his back, legs in the air, letting a 7-year-old girl scratch his belly while he made sounds like a broken, squeaky toy. Raymond's voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped raw from shouting. "Kid, what the hell is going on?" Mary looked up from where she sat on the sidewalk, Buster's massive head cradled in her lap. Her face was streaked with tears and dog saliva, her yellow dress covered in dirt and slobber. She looked at Raymond like she was seeing him for the first time, and something in her expression hardened. "This is my dog." The words came out fierce, protective. "His name is Buster. He was stolen from our house 2 years ago." Raymond felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Stolen." "There was a break-in." Mary's voice shook, but she kept going, one hand absently scratching behind Buster's ear in a way that made the Rottweiler's eyes half close with contentment. "I was at school. My mom was at work. They took our TV and my mom's jewelry and some other stuff. And they took Buster. The police said they probably wanted to sell him because Rottweilers are expensive." She said it matter-of-factly, the way kids do when they've been forced to accept terrible things they're too young to understand. But her chin trembled. "We looked everywhere. We put up posters. We checked every shelter in 3 counties. My mom called breeders and vets and—" Her voice cracked. "We thought he was dead. Or that whoever took him was keeping him somewhere we'd never find him." Raymond stared at the dog, at Buster, trying to reconcile this information with the 18 months he'd spent wielding him as a weapon. The breeder had sold him Charlie as a trained security animal, an aggressive dog perfect for intimidation work. The papers had said, the papers. Raymond had never actually looked that closely at the papers, just verified there was a registration number and moved on. He'd assumed they were legitimate because why wouldn't they be? You didn't question the pedigree of a weapon. "Look." Mary gently lifted Buster's left front paw, turning it so Raymond could see. "See this? Right here on his pad?" Raymond crouched down, wincing as his abused shoulder protested. There, on the dog's paw pad, was a distinctive mark, a patch of pink skin shaped vaguely like a heart against the black. It was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Raymond had never noticed it before. "He was born with it," Mary said quietly. "The vet said it's just a pigmentation thing. My mom took like 100 pictures of it when we first got him because she thought it was so cute. She said it was like he came with a little heart to show how much he'd love us." Buster yawned, showing all his teeth in what would normally be a terrifying display. Then he licked Mary's hand and settled his head more comfortably in her lap, making a contented, grumbling sound. Raymond sat back on his heels, his bloody hand hanging useless at his side. The vicious killer he'd bought from an underground breeder. The untamable weapon that had hospitalized 3 people, though. The dog that had never shown Raymond a moment of loyalty or affection. A stolen pet. A family dog who'd been ripped away from the only person he'd ever loved. No wonder he'd been uncontrollable. No wonder he'd been aggressive. He'd been grieving. Raymond looked at them, really looked at them, for a long moment. The little girl in the yellow dress, now dirt-stained and tear-streaked, holding onto a Rottweiler like he was the most precious thing in the world. The dog, who'd been a monster in Raymond's hands, lying peacefully with his eyes half-closed in pure contentment as Mary's small fingers traced patterns through his fur. Then Raymond looked down at himself, at the tattoos covering his chest and crawling up his neck, each one a marker of choices he'd made, territories he'd claimed, people he'd hurt. At the blood dripping from his palm onto concrete that had almost witnessed a tragedy. At the expensive blazer that was supposed to make him look powerful, but just made him look like exactly what he was, a man who took things that didn't belong to him and called it strength. His eyes moved to the spiked collar around Buster's neck. Heavy steel, sharp points designed to look menacing. The kind of collar you put on a weapon, not a pet, not a family member. It was grotesque. That's what it was. He'd wrapped this dog in cruelty and called it control. Raymond's hand moved to the collar before he'd consciously decided to move. His fingers, slick with blood, fumbled with the buckle. Buster didn't growl, didn't snap, just watched Raymond with those deep brown eyes while Mary held her breath. The collar came free with a click that sounded unnaturally loud in the afternoon quiet. Raymond held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the sharp spikes that had never been necessary. Then he dropped it on the sidewalk where it landed with a dull clang. The leash came next. The heavy leather that had burned his palm raw, that had been the only thing connecting him to this animal he'd never actually owned. His fingers worked the clip, and it released with a soft snick. Buster was free. No collar, no leash, nothing tying him to Raymond Wade or the life Raymond had forced him into. "Take him home, kid," Raymond said. His voice came out quieter than intended, but steady. Mary looked up at him with wide eyes, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. "Really?" "He was never mine." Raymond stood, every muscle in his body screaming protest. "Should have been obvious from the start." He took a step back, then another. Buster didn't even look at him. The dog's entire focus remained on Mary, his tail thumping steadily against the concrete. Raymond turned and started walking. Behind him, he heard Mary's voice, bright with joy and disbelief. "Come on, Buster, let's go home. Mom's not going to believe this." He didn't look back, didn't watch them leave together, the girl and her dog, reunited after 2 years of separation he'd been part of without knowing. His hand throbbed. His shoulder felt like someone had driven railroad spikes through it. The afternoon sun beat down on his bare chest, and without Charlie, without Buster beside him, Raymond felt smaller somehow, less imposing, more alone. But walking away from them, leaving the spiked collar and bloody leash on the sidewalk behind him, like shed skin, Raymond Wade understood something for the first time in his adult life. You couldn't steal loyalty, couldn't buy it, couldn't force it with leather and spikes and intimidation. Loyalty was given freely, or it wasn't loyalty at all. It was just fear wearing a leash.